Hello everyone, I'm Adrifting, and today I'm going to be talking about a heavy web novel with a rather unassuming title called Durin's Diary. Now there's a couple pronunciations. The more direct pronunciation translation is Dulin's Diary. And depending on whether you use like Google or Bing translation, you can even get kind of a German accented translation with an accent, umlaut accent over the U called Durin's Diary. Now, Durin's Diary or Duling's Diary has 1,086 chapters, so it's across the 1,000 plus chapter threshold. It's a magical industrial revolution, political high fantasy story with a lot of magic. It's written by an accomplished author, Half Step Purgatory or 半部炼狱, and it was recently finished in July 7th of 2025 of this year, so quite recently. Duling's Diary, the direct Chinese title is Dulin日记. Du, that Chinese character just means birch tree. Ling just means forest, so Dueling just means birch forest, relating to our main character. If you look from the cover, he's kind of a non-human, leaning more to that Nekomimi furry fox spirit sort of thing. He has candlelit dragon blood, so Dueling birch forest is referring to his non-human steppe elf, prairie elf character. Or the direct translation is sun. In this case, it just means daily, and then G just means writing or record. So a daily record translates to Duling's Diary. Let's talk about 半部炼狱 or Half Step Purgatory, the author of this web novel. He's quite an accomplished author. He's written 2 or 3 previous works before, very long, 马林之诗, Marlin's poem. He likes to write about protagonist pairs or deuteragonists, usually a human and a non-human character. As I said before, we're leaning more toward that kind of fox spirit sort of style. In Japanese or anime, it's generally fox or cat spirits, right? Chinese really love their non-human protagonists. And that type of story, usually in Chinese web novels, Japanese, I think there's the influence of Shintoism, but in Chinese, you get novels like, Legend of the White Snake, Fox Spirit Matchmaker, I'm an Immortal Fox, Thankful Fox in Tokyo. But there are 2 prevailing tropes. One is the lowly fox girl character. So this kind of evokes that feeling of, sibling for the MC. Titles like A Word Game that started after being picked up by a Catty Girl, or The Daily Life that began after picking up the Little Fox Demon. There are various tropes that are interspersed in that, various character relationships. And it really reminded me of the Magical Girl web novels. There's even a more niche trope called Gender Bender, where a male character gets Magical Girl abilities. Those ones always have unique stories to them as well, and it just reminded me of that. In this case, our main character is a steppe elf, and he has a childhood friend who's destined for greater things. She's like a 6th class mage, but our main character has advantages of his own. Before we get too deep into that, let's start off with a summary. Dueling was sitting on a black leather sofa, stroking the black cat on the armrest. With the glasses on his nose, he looked across the long table in front of him and at the man kneeling on the carpet. I understand that you made money in Naples, did a good business, lived a good life, and had the secret police, friends in the law and the underworld, and the royal family all speaking on your behalf. You don't need a friend like me. I know you're afraid of owing me a favor and don't want to get involved in trouble. But now you come to me and say, please, Mr. Dulin of the Corleone family, please help me get justice and save my life and my family from suffering. But, in your eyes, I only saw a second-rate artist who made movies and played music. Even when death was imminent, you still disrespected me and even refused to call me the Secret Keeper. Now, this is a reference to the 1974 film by Marlon Brando with The Godfather, Michael Corleone being head of the Corleone family. This particular scene comes quite later on when he's interacting with the merchant family around chapter 500. But there's a lot of elements in this summary. Our main character is known to be somewhat of an arms dealer. But before we go into the story, he originates from a parallel world similar to Earth. He is from this assassination organization called the Tower, who dies because of medical complications. Now, Half Step Purgatory 半部炼狱, due to his previous works, is influenced by a lot of mages web novels. The main character, he bottles some of that old wine, that old magic, and kind of reintroduces it in this interrelation story. How? He takes this main character who reincarnates into another world, and along with him comes a health computer chip from the future. And it said for it's a parallel world, so it's not quite Earth, but it has similar culture. It's kind of similar to those titles of bringing culture to another world. And the computer chip by itself doesn't really do much. It's used in the past. It's always been known as a system-based web novel, and usually it's kind of been innovated out in more recent web novels. But it was just an interesting aspect. Now, another interesting aspect is his assassination background. He's kind of cold-blooded. He's a force theorist. He believes in, the might is right, power is force. You need force to enable justice and morals, right? Very much like the human emperor and whatnot. So our main character is quite hands-off. Now, as his assassination background and his secret identity is Ezio Auditore, and a reference to Assassin's Creed, it evokes titles like Eminence in the Shadows or The Reincarnated Assassin. Although I would compare this web novel more to something like Parallel Isekai Pharmacy or World Teacher, not quite Apothecary Diaries. But it's just that sort of story. I've been reading a lot of great fan fictions, whether it's like this sci-fi Conan fan fiction, Arknights fan fiction, Gundam Seed, which I'm going to relate to. There's a couple of unique points in Gundam Seed, and yeah, a couple others that relate to the art of filmmaking, which we'll get into here. So our main character, kind of being referenced as Godfather, he starts off in this world producing Winchesters, right? Usually in most web novels, when you're reincarnated. Oh, actually, let's talk about his reincarnation first. So there's a couple ways you appear in another world. Whether you transmigrate, your body is summoned to another world, or your body, usually it's like a car crash, a truck driver crashes into you, or you're summoned, right? That's a classic isekai trope. Sometimes I'm trying to remember the various ones. So a truck crash is the most common. That's transmigrated. You possess the body of another native. So you died in your previous world. You did good merit, and then you possess another body. That's transmigration. Reincarnation is when your soul is brought to another world and you're brought up. As again, that's very similar to World Teacher Eminence in the Shadows sort of thing, where you kind of grow in that world. Ascendance of a bookworm, even. Our main character is born into this noble elf family, the Ish family. And he's friends with the Ayer family, a childhood friend, as said, who's destined for greater things, has mage bloodline. Our main character, being a steppe or a prairie elf, has candlelight dragon blood, so he's also special in his own right, kind of mixed blood. And due to this style of reincarnation and the explanation behind it, it's not quite a strings-off adventure where a main character is able to proves his own goal. He does, but there is an explanation for it, and so there are various tropes invoked, such as the chosen one trope. He has to interact with the gods. This is a high fantasy story, so there are gods, there are dwarves, there are elves, there are non-human anthropomorphic races, kind of like the fox spirits, and the various gods, they maintain a bottom line. There's the god of nobility, the god of war, the god of agriculture, the god of art, the god of love. All these gods, and our main character will interact with them in some way. These gods are the bottom line, such as noblesse oblige, where the nobles have to care for the people underneath them. So there's a bottom line to the story. This is not a pure, dark-hearted story as you would see with Blackstone's Code, but it's not all right either, which we'll discuss as we go on. So our main character, being this cold-blooded character, is kind of an observer, as you would see in Princess Mononoke. He's kind of observing the world as a whole. It's not quite as passionate as you would see with characters such as Nomenclature of the Night or Joy of Life, Kingdom's Bloodline, Chronicles of Guhai, those sorts of stories. Especially the one I love to compare this to is 27, because this is an industrialization web novel, as World of Deed is a magical industrial empire. So our main character does not actively get involved in these events. He's very hands-off. He's very observant. Kingdom's Bloodline and Joy of Life had those sorts of observing, human power, right, with like the human emperor. And like Nightfall was much more really involved character in just certain events. So yeah, our main character starts off as a noble family and one of the elves' noble families, Ish. So being a reincarnated, bringing culture to another world, he starts off his first pot of gold, right? That's the famous saying. Usually most reincarnated characters, like in Ascendance of Bookworm, you start off with soap, right? Pig lye and fat. Lye and pig fat is how Ascendance of a Bookworm starts off with. I think it's Marin. Regressor's Tale of Cultivation. There's a unique manga panel as well. For more advanced ones, you move on to From Soap to Perfume. and sometimes even silk making, right? Silk production is a big one. And then I think even in Magical Industrial Empire, they talk about blast iron furnaces, just because you want to increase the level of productivity. Once you are able to raise, iron making and technology to make, more better agriculture for like iron plows and weaponry, and you're more secure in agriculture and food, can you have more for entertainment, such as bringing culture to another world? That's why a lot of those type of stories revolve around dragons. And when you have bringing culture to another world, you have, you know, there's a famous quote from one of those stories that said you have the whole civilization standing behind you when you're talking about culture. So they mentioned movies and playing music, right? Our main character, being this noble, he starts off as an arms dealer. He's a grandmaster level blacksmith, and he's able to produce weapons. He starts off with Winchesters and shotguns, and it slowly goes up in caliber to artillery and explosives. So he's changing the world and the name of the game around him. He's solidified his power in the elvish world, and he is known as a master craftsman, an inventor, right? He's exporting these weapons, and there's various Lords of War references in Ezio Auditore, so Assassin's Creed, and he subscribes to the god of vengeance and revenge later on. And this is going to be relevant when he travels to the human world. The first 20 chapters is character background. The first 100 chapters, he goes to the Human Academy to learn about this new art, this new magic called cinema, right? He becomes a filmmaker, a film director. Now, in Chinese culture, there's something called the six arts. The Confucian six arts relates to the things a scholar must learn, such as rituals, music, archery, charioteering or horseback riding, calligraphy, and mathematics. These are kind of the arts that you would study. And in modern times, there's something called the seventh art. Rico Canuto coined the term. It expands upon the five classical arts. I think it's like from Greece or something, which is architecture, sculpture, painting, music, poetry. Canuto added dance, but then he called filmmaking the Canuto called filmmaking the seventh art. Now in Chinese, they call it the eight arts: architecture, sculpture, painting, music, poetry, dance, drama, then filmmaking. But you've got a lot of other subgenres such as crosstalk and all that, and plays and so on and so forth. And they've even tried to coin the ninth term, and this is going back to my urban life background. There's this fun gender bender called starting from drawing comics quietly. The French proposed the ninth art to be comics, graphic novels, mangakas, right, Bakugan and all that. But I like the alternate interpretation of the ninth art, especially in drawing, starting as a comics editor, which was video games, right? So many great video games came out: Balatro, Expedition 33, Hollow Knight, Silk Song. So, video games, a lot of these passionate web novels in the entertainment space love to talk about it, right? Like, how did you become a star? Unemployed at the beginning, Let the Music Devil Return. But especially starting from drawing comics quietly, a lot of these passionate web novels that talk about, writing about comics also talk about video games. And I love that passion, right? Reading a lot of great fan fictions there as well. Dueling's Diary is actually very similar to another title called Fish from All Over the World, Fish Swimming All Over the World, 天下游鱼, which had a similar, very cool mystery aspect, similar to Grandmaster Strategies or Human Emperor. It was just one of the ones that I recently read that was very similar. Anyway, discussing this story, he travels to this human world and he's learning filmmaking, right? And he's bringing upon this culture. And his accomplishment and his films in filmmaking brings him to brush the shoulders of the political elite, whether it's the patron saints of the gods, right? The goddess of art, the goddess of love, the goddess of agriculture, the twin goddesses, the goddess of earth. Or even just huge political figures, right? Whether it's King Robert of the North, a lot of people want him to make films for them. He goes to Venice as well and changes merchant making as a whole, introducing economic ideas. As I said before, underneath his extroverted exterior, he's still very much an assassin subscribing to the goddess of vengeance, and he comes across a lot of these ideas in the kingdom of the north. There's this philosophy called northernism. There's this huge conflict between the nobles and the ruling class, the monarchical ruling class, the dying King Robert, and as his King Robert and his grandfather have a connection in some way, the Ish family. And here's where we come along the central ideas to the story, which is revolution, war, and peace. It proposes the idea that history is constantly in flux. There's constant cycles to it, right? In Chinese history, it's called unification and breaking apart. Unification and breaking apart. Well, there's the Qin dynasty unifying China and then splitting apart into three kingdoms and then reunifying again under like the Song or Tang and then breaking apart again into like, many smaller nations, right? That's a very common theme, like, war, life is a stage, right? And there's all these various acts. The second central theme is that greed is endless, right? Economics basically calculates that desire must be endless for innovation to exist, right? And capitalism harnesses that greed to constantly innovate. And because greed is endless, struggle is endless, and people will always be wanting more, right? Northernism is this idea of reform, bringing more towards the lower class, right? Whether it's communism or democracy, there's these various ideas thrown around, and the ruling class want to maintain the status quo. And there's this constant conflict, this historical conflict that we've seen as well, right? 27, they talked about it, and it always remarks that history is not guaranteed. The same sentiments are echoed in Duling's diary, where these people who believe in Northernism aren't guaranteed of positive change. And sometimes even the people who previously believed in Northernism betrayed these ideals, right? The solution was always there, but the people have changed, right? So that sort of cynicism, that pessimism kind of evokes that historical political accuracy in Duling's diary. Now in Gundam Seed, there's a line that hit me, right? Our main character in Gundam Seed fiction, being as weak as he is, foresees something greater. He prescribes to the line, humans' place is among the stars, right? But his personal influence on the war, on the political impact of the world is limited, right? It talks about the limitations of a single person and his actions, and also what he can bring. Whether it's the civil war in Myanmar or the things happening in Nepal, right? We're seeing a lot of this great political turmoil. And, sometimes it feels futile of what one person can do. There's so many things constantly happening. But, it's really, there's a breath of fresh air when you say, oh, people are working toward a greater good. I've slightly become disillusioned to that as I see the political landscape as a whole. But then, I think a lot of these stories in trying to tell their small kernel of truth try to get at that, like these political ideals, and the reason why people fought for the things that they did is to create, change. And it's just a very interesting narrative. So yeah, our main character, becoming a cinematographer, observing all these things in the north, eventually gets kicked out for just the political instability. He goes from the northernism back to his elvish kingdom and goes to the south of Venice and is constantly observing the world as a whole, bringing culture, weaponry. He becomes this high level arms dealer influencing the war behind the scenes. He doesn't get physically involved, but he is just watching everything. So yeah, Dueling's Diary introduces a lot of these political elements, a lot of these industrialization elements, and it's very cool to see in a web novel. It's 1,000+ chapters, so it's definitely past the threshold. But it's written by an accomplished author, Half Step Purgatory. He's written works like this before. If you like non-human protagonists, you look at the cover art. You enjoy this type of story. I highly recommend Dueling's Diary. It took me a couple recordings to finally get this right. But yeah, it was a fun read. And yeah, that's Dueling's Diary. We'll stop here.